Toby had always been a night owl. For him, the stillness of the night was a welcome escape from the chaos of daily life. The hum of the city, the chatter of people, the buzz of notifications. Everything seemed to fade away when the darkness enveloped him. It was during the late hours that he felt the most alive, or perhaps the most at peace, as he delved deep into his studies. A college student living in a small, quiet town, Toby was used to long nights at the library, getting lost in textbooks and assignments. But tonight felt different. The night felt strangely heavy, as if something was lurking just beyond the horizon. The clock had just passed midnight when Toby finally decided to leave the library. The campus was empty, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old wooden floors and the faint rustle of paper. It had been a particularly grueling study session, and Toby could feel the exhaustion creeping up on him. He grabbed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and headed out the door. The cold night air hit him as soon as he stepped outside, sending a shiver down his spine. He took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air, before walking towards his car parked at the far end of the lot. His car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, sat in the empty parking lot under the flickering light of the street lamp. The yellowish glow illuminated the rain-drenched pavement around it, casting long, eerie shadows. Toby unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The worn leather squeaked beneath him as he adjusted his position, his tired eyes scanning the dashboard. The car's headlights flickered on with a dull hum, casting a pale glow on the wet road ahead. Toby was too tired to care, too eager to get home, and collapsed into his bed. As he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the empty road, a strange feeling began to settle in the pit of his stomach. The roads were unusually quiet for this time of night. The faint drizzle of rain tapped gently against the windshield, but other than that, the highway was eerily silent. No cars, no lights in the distance, just the steady sound of his tires against the asphalt. Toby frowned, his fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. It was as though the world had gone to sleep, leaving him alone on this desolate road. The highway leading out of town was long and winding, stretching for miles with only a few scattered streetlights to break the darkness. It was a road Toby had driven down countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The trees lining the road seemed to loom closer, casting dark, threatening shadows over the narrow lane. The fog that had settled in the valley below seemed to creep up towards the road, swirling in the headlights like a living, breathing entity. Toby squinted through the windshield, trying to make out the faint shapes ahead. Suddenly, in the distance, he noticed something strange. A faint light flickered on the horizon. It was a dim glow, almost like a pair of taillights, barely visible through the haze of fog. Toby's heart skipped a beat. The highway had been completely empty just moments ago. Why was there a car ahead of him now? His curiosity piqued. Toby eased his foot off the gas and slowed down, trying to make sense of the situation. As he drew closer, the outline of the car became clearer. It was a silver sedan, parked awkwardly in the middle of the highway, its brake lights glowing an eerie red in the darkness. The car was angled at an odd position, its door slightly ajar, but there was no sign of movement. No one was inside, and the vehicle seemed abandoned. Toby's unease grew. He had never seen anyone on this road at this time of night, let alone an abandoned car. A cold chill ran down his spine. He slowed down, pulling up behind the car. His mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? It was as though the car had been abandoned in a hurry, left behind with no explanation. Toby's eyes swept over the car, looking for any signs of damage or a reason for its abandonment. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the fog and the rain falling steadily around him. That's when he noticed something in the corner of his eye. A figure, standing in the distance. A man. He was standing just off the side of the road, half hidden by the trees. Toby froze, his body going stiff as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The man was tall, his figure shrouded in shadows, but the glow from the car's taillights cast a pale light on him, illuminating his face. Toby's heart pounded in his chest as he caught sight of the man's eyes, wide, unblinking, and eerily vacant. The man's expression was devoid of any emotion, his face pale and gaunt, like a corpse. A cold shiver ran down Toby's spine. The man wasn't moving, just standing there, watching him with those hollow eyes. It was as though he was waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Toby's legs felt heavy, his instincts screaming at him to turn around, to get back in his car and drive away. But his body refused to obey. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. Toby's eyes widened as the man began to approach him, his movements unnervingly slow and stiff. The man's face remained expressionless, his gaze never leaving Toby for a second. The closer the man got, the more Toby's unease grew, until it was almost unbearable. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, the sound deafening in the silence. Then, without warning, the man stopped just a few feet away from Toby, his gaze still locked on him. Toby's breath hitched in his throat. He wanted to run, to get away from this strange, unsettling figure, but his legs wouldn't move. He felt paralyzed, trapped in place by the man's intense stare. "You shouldn't be here," the man finally said, his voice low and cold. The words sent a chill down Toby's spine. "You need to turn back." Toby's mind raced. What was happening? Who was this man? And why was he warning him? His body was finally able to move, and without thinking, he spun on his heel and sprinted back to his car, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fumbled with the door handle, his hands shaking as he climbed back into the car. He didn't dare look back as he slammed the door shut, locking it in a panic. His heart was pounding in his chest as he slammed the car into gear, his foot pressing the accelerator to the floor. The car lurched forward, speeding down the highway, the headlights cutting through the fog. Toby didn't stop. He didn't look back. All he could think about was getting as far away from that man, from the abandoned car, from the strange warning. He had to get home. He had to get away from whatever that had been. But as he drove down the road, something else happened. His headlights flickered, dimming for a split second before coming back to full brightness. Toby's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he glanced in the rearview mirror. To his horror, the silver set-in was gone. The road behind him was completely empty, not a single car in sight. He couldn't explain it. He had just passed the spot where the car had been. Had it been a hallucination? A trick of the light? Suddenly, the glow of headlights appeared in the distance again, but this time it was much closer. Toby's breath caught in his throat as he realized it wasn't just any car. It was the same silver sedan, parked once more in the middle of the highway. His mind raced with fear. How could it be back there? He had just passed it, hadn't he? The car wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, taillights glowing in the dark, as if it had been waiting for him. Toby didn't know what was happening. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to stop to find out. Toby's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes wide with fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking just beyond his vision. The car behind him, the same silver sedan, was still there, parked in the middle of the highway, its brake lights casting a haunting red glow that painted the mist around him. As he glanced in the rearview mirror, the fog seemed to thicken, swirling around the car like some sort of malevolent presence, drawing closer to him with every second. Toby's pulse quickened, the eerie quiet of the road amplified by the rapid thumping in his chest. He was driving faster now, desperately trying to put distance between himself and that terrifying scene. But no matter how far he drove, it felt as though the road was stretching on endlessly, looping back on itself. The headlights flickered again. This time there wasn't just a glitch. It felt deliberate, as if the car itself was warning him. "Don't stop," Toby muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Suddenly, as if in response to this silent plea, the silver sedan vanished from the road, just like that. 1 second it was there, casting its eerie glow, and the next, it was gone. Toby slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping into his throat. He stared at the empty highway ahead, not daring to believe what his eyes were telling him. But before he could even process what had just happened, the radio crackled to life. Toby's breath hitched as static filled the car, followed by a faint voice. "Turn back, Toby." The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It sounded familiar. Toby's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. No car, no figure in the distance. The road was completely empty. He could feel his skin prickling, every nerve in his body on high alert. Who was that voice? How did it know his name? A cold sweat broke out across his forehead as the voice echoed again, clearer this time. Turn back now, before it's too late. Panic surged through Toby as the radio hissed, the static growing louder, drowning out everything else. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating him, but there was no way he was going to stop and turn around. Not after everything that had just happened. His foot slammed on the gas pedal, pushing the car forward, and he sped down the dark, desolate highway, willing himself to escape the nightmare that had unfolded in front of him. Every nerve screamed at him to look back, but he refused. He had to get away. Minutes passed in tense silence as the fog seemed to lift. The air grew lighter, the oppressive feeling beginning to ease. Toby dared to hope that whatever force had been chasing him was finally gone. But as he neared the final stretch of the highway, something stopped him dead in his tracks. Ahead of him, another roadblock appeared. A single figure stood in the middle of the road, a man, his back turned to Toby, staring off into the night. It wasn't the same man he had seen earlier. This one was different, taller, with a more refined presence, yet somehow just as unsettling. Toby could feel his heart drop in his chest, as if his body already knew what was about to happen. Without thinking, he swerved to avoid the figure. But as his tires skidded, something strange happened. The road didn't bend or curve as it should have. Instead, it seemed to fold into itself, distorting, warping into a loop that Toby couldn't escape. His eyes went wide with terror as the landscape around him twisted and bent, trapping him in a never-ending cycle. No matter how hard he tried to break free, the road only took him back to the same spot, the same figure standing motionless in the middle of the road, waiting. And then the voice came again, clearer than before, now all around him. "You never left, Toby. You've been here all along." Toby's breath caught in his throat as he slammed his hands against the wheel, trying to make sense of it all. The fog, the car, the strange figure, it was all too much. His mind felt like it was unraveling. He was trapped. As his car finally came to a halt, the figure turned slowly, his eyes empty, void of any recognition. A shadow passed over his face, and Toby's heart froze in his chest as the man whispered one final sentence, "Welcome home, Toby." In an instant, the figure's face twisted into a grotesque grin, its features warping, the mouth stretching unnaturally wide. The car's lights flickered again, plunging Toby into darkness. The last thing he saw was the figure's face, grinning at him with unnatural malice, before everything went black.